This is WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM. And we have with us at WZRD via Zoom, Hy Thurman. Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Yes.
very well.
Awesome. So Hy, we were reading several excerpts from your book, Revolutionary Hillbilly. And so that our listeners could have an idea about the extensive, your extensive experiences, how you came to be an advocate for the community. So in your book, Revolutionary Hillbilly, you disclose that you were born and raised in Appalachia, where your mother struggled to raise your family by working as not as a farmhand. Was that your own property that you were raising the crops, or was the family working as a farmhands?
We were farmhand sharecroppers, basically, yes, working for someone else.
Mm-hmm. And you also mentioned in the book that due to mechanization, that lifestyle is pretty much gone, or is there still farm work to be done?
Yes, there's still some to be done, although most of it now is done by migrants.
Oh.
But not to the extent that when I was raised there in the 50s, 60s.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the mechanization of it, there's not that much of a demand like there used to be for farm workers. But
Mm-hmm.
it's seasonal, because now I know in my hometown there's probably 500-600 migrants come in a year, to work the farms.
Then what about the white members of the community? What jobs aren't there any jobs available to them in your hometown now?
Jobs available?
Yes.
Well, in my hometown, there's some industry that's moved in.
Mm-hmm.
That gives them jobs. Of course, some people are farmers,
Mm-hmm.
That are there, but it's mostly, some type of just industrial work, where they will travel. Many of them travel to like Chattanooga, which is 30 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
And they work in a number of those factories, although the unemployment rate is still very high,
Mm-hmm.
In my hometown and in that general area.
Is it as high as it was when you came to Chicago?
I don't believe so. I believe that because of some of the industry that's moved south, there are more jobs available, for those that can get the jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And some of there's a few more training programs that there didn't used to be, because when I was raised, there's no help at all.
Right. What about educational opportunities? Because you when you moved to Chicago, you said that you were reading only at a grade school level because there weren't any. What were the schools like when you were growing up?
Well, the schools were very basic. There wasn't much happening. Just the old reading, writing, arithmetic type thing, and there wasn't much more. They did have some, I don't know, some home ec classes and things like that. But there wasn't many opportunities for much of an education. Other than sports, it was either football or basketball. So those of us that were not really interested in that, so that wasn't really for us. But we were. I had the reason that I was on such a low reading level in education was because I had to work. I had to work in the field. I had to stop working and help out when I could. my twin brother and I were the youngest, and we were taken out into the fields when we were 3 years old.
Right. I actually read that excerpt from your book over the air. Mhm.
Yeah, and of course we continued that up until, you know, I was about 17 when I was 17 when I left Tennessee and went to Chicago.
Mhm.
And so as an effect, you know, of that, I was reading on a third grade level,
Mhm.
basically,
Mhm.
you know, so I had to fight for my opportunities, you know, to get into some GED programs. And
Well, when you were young, you not only had to fight for educational opportunities, you had to fight for survival. You described police brutality in Appalachia for you in Tennessee, and in Chicago when you came here to Uptown for a better life. What is the state of police brutality now compared to what it used to be in the 1950s and the 1960s when you moved to Chicago's Uptown for a better life?
well, I don't believe it is to the extent that it was then, because, you know, we didn't have cell phones. And what's happening now is a lot of people with cell phones are monitoring the police, and there was none of that existed when we were in the Uptown area. They were pretty well wide open to do whatever they wanted to do, because the people living in Uptown and other poor communities in Chicago was treated as very insignificant by, you know, the city government. They didn't want people, the rest of the people in the city, basically, or the suburbs, to know that there were slums in Chicago.
Mhm.
And so that was hidden. A
Mhm.
lot of that.
Invisible slums, I think you mentioned.
Yeah, invisible slums. And the cops were, you know, had carte blanche to do whatever they wanted to do. You know, that was to beat people up. We had some numbers killed. People were, you know, it was not unusual, and there are cases of cops raping women. And so in the poor communities in that time, they would put the most dangerous cops, or the ones that, you know, that had the violent, and they'd put them into the poor communities, be it black or brown or white.
Or in Uptown.
In Uptown. Yeah.
Do you have any insight as to how it would benefit the city to treat the Black and brown communities and the poor whites this way?
Well, I do know that I was, you know, it was explained to me by a police officer that they had a certain quota of people that they had to charge with crimes, even though they were false, because Mayor Daley, Richard J. Daley, we call him King Richard I, he used those statistics to get more money, more federal and state money for the city. And so they were actually encouraging crime in a lot of ways.
So they would get more money to fight crime as long as crime is high in the city. Is that what that means?
Exactly. They could show statistics of crime, therefore they need more money for more, you know, police enforcement, law enforcement. And they would use that. He would, you know, the city would use that as a way of getting additional funds for the police department.
Well, for Mayor Richard J. Daley, you mentioned that he wants these communities, the poor communities, to be hidden away so that he could present a prosperous Chicago to the world. And then, of course, right now you mentioned that they wanted the crime statistics to be high in order to get more money. So were they able to balance the two? And then also, do you have any insight as to how this city model has changed?
Well, yeah, you know, if you go back to the Democratic National Convention, you know, in 68, Mayor Daley deliberately put up walls on some of the roads that some of the delegates would drive into, so they could not see the slums. Daley also made a statement that there are no slums in Chicago, you know, in which we very well know there was. Chicago is the most segregated city in the, you know, in the country. Now, and then, you know, they also had urban renewal, which urban renewal came in to supposedly renew, you know, the structures, infrastructures of the city, you know, the buildings, in which it was nothing but a poor people's removal, to remove people out of these slums, and to send the like the Appalachian people back on the migrant trail. Now, the same thing's happened. They just call it gentrification, you know, because you won't find very many people in uptown Chicago, you know, that can afford the rent on those apartments now. They're extremely high, you know, 2,000 and up usually a month, and regular working class person cannot afford that. So it was another people's removal by the city, because they wanted to upgrade these communities for more taxes. They wanted to bring more of the people back into the city that had moved to the suburbs. And that was all in terms of, you know, getting more revenue.
Well, you also mentioned in the book about the arsons for hire, in which at least 16 people died, right?
Well, there were actually more than that, but 2020, the TV show did an expose on it and found out that, you know, there were like 20 people or 25 people. But and then the arson for hire came in with urban renewal, because Mayor Daley wanted to, you know, gentrify uptown. Uptown was built as a entertainment district back in the 20s for the city, and it was their diamond, you know. But because, and it was also the real Hollywood at that time, where they made all the movies. The Esnary Studio is still there, owned by Charlie Chaplin. Entertainment was there, coming in from all over the world. But there was an exodus to the suburbs. And then there was the movie industry moved to California and other parts of the country. Left a lot of vacancies, you know, in these apartments. Some of them were efficiency apartments, you know, so people could move into. And then finally, you know, the landlords that owned it cut some of these big apartments up into efficiency apartments or smaller apartments. And people from all over the world could come in and rent these very cheaply, you know, by the week, if they had to. So uptown eventually became a slum. And then,
how did it profit the landlords to not keep it up? Did they, if they had all these rents, why would it be more profitable to them to let it go down rather than keep it up and keep the rents going?
Yeah, it was a gradual process. It happened over time. And it would have been more profitable for them if they could have gotten the people to move in. But at that time, they were trying to, there were some people that moved in, you know, that could afford, you know, some of the apartments or the houses along the lakefront, not far from the lakefront. You know, there's a Frank Lloyd Wright house there, also shows you the status of the community at one time. And then, but because of the economics at that time, I believe, you know, people coming back from World War II, that the landlords, you know, a lot of them couldn't sell the buildings that they wanted to sell. And so they were willing to take, you know, cheaper rents and let people move in, because there was.
And do you have any idea why they would want to sell if the building was making them money, why would they want to sell?
Well, some of them didn't want to stay in the uptown community. They had lived, they had other buildings in other communities, that were profitable. But it was very profitable to have people, paying a low rent because it was a steady rent. It was always there. There were very few vacancies because they could always fill the apartments, and they could charge whatever they want to, or charge whatever the people could pay, and so for them, it was just an economic type thing. So what happened when Urban Renewal came in, and Mayor Daley, his dream, and he's always converted neighborhoods by putting some kind of an institution or museum or college or something into a community to upgrade the community. And that's what he did with Uptown, with the Truman College that's there now.
It takes up a quarter of the Uptown real estate, you said?
Yes, and it also removed, there are 40,000 Southern people there at any given time, and this was basically the area that they lived in. And so in order to get that college in there, and it was proved that there were some landlords that came in, people that came in and bought up a bunch of the buildings.
Did they know that the Truman College was coming in and they wanted to flip it so that they could make money?
Yes, they wanted to make money, and what they would do is buy the building cheaply, torch the building, get insurance from the building, and sell the property back to the Chicago. There are a lot of crooked politicians involved in that at that time.
Do you have any idea about how much of the real estate was burned down this way? About how any percentage of Uptown that was that had to suffer this kind of arson?
Suffered arson? Well, I know that there were probably 20 buildings or more that were burned.
And those 20 buildings were on the side of where Truman College is now?
Well, some of them were, but these people that bought these buildings also bought buildings in another part of Uptown, and they also would burn those buildings.
Do you know what's on the side of those buildings now?
Well, the ones on the side of the buildings that in Uptown is mostly Truman College. The other buildings, of course, have been torn down, and new structures, new buildings have been built. And we had a proposal to build a village there in that area where the Truman College is now, and it was a self-sustaining village. But eventually,
so what was the name of the village again?
Well, it was first called the People's Village, but then it was called the Hank Williams Village.
Right.
And that was because Hank Williams was a very famous country singer. And we would have our own health department, free health clinics, legal services, food programs for the kids. We'd have a employment agency, and also we had a hotel where people would move in. When they were coming there, we'd try to find them jobs, and people would have the opportunity to actually buy buildings if they wanted to. And the powers that be said that if you get funding for this, we will take a serious look at it. We did get funding for it. We got $250,000 at that time.
Who funded you?
Well, it was a number of places. There were several real estate firms that believed in it. There were conglomerations of church organizations. There were other types of financial institutions, very reputable.
Credit unions or banks? Like what?
Well, banks, yeah. There were banks that were involved in it.
Were they the neighborhood banks, or were they?
No, they weren't. They weren't neighborhood banks. The neighborhood banks were trying to get rid of us, basically. They didn't want us in there. So Bank of Chicago, I think, was one that was in there. They didn't want us because they were, they were all the leadership of the urban renewal committees in other model cities and those that were trying to get rid of us. So it was other organizations and banks, financial institutions, realtors, and they said that it was a very feasible program, but in the end, we lost.
Mhm. And what was the turning point that made that caused the loss? It was just that the city didn't want it, and then brought it to bear and pulled the string so that it didn't happen.
With the Hank Williams Village, yeah.
Yes.
Well, yeah, they never wanted it. They never did want it. They wanted to return the community back to what it was at one time, which was, an entertainment district, and which it is now. I mean, it's been gentrified, and they've turned it back into what it was back in the 20s and 30s.
How much rent were you paying when you lived there? Do you still remember?
Oh yeah, I mean, I remember when I had to move. Oh, I was paying anywhere from $50-$60 a month. I mean, it was kind of cheap, and I moved up to Rogers Park on the lake, and I was paying $149. That was, now that place rents for about $2,500. And any of those places that I lived in that it still exists, that haven't been torn down, they're going for like $2,000 or more for an apartment.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that the children in Uptown had the worst survival rate because of lead poisoning and because of malnutrition. So if lead paint is not only confined to the poor apartments, because lead paint was used everywhere. Do you know the state of lead paint right now in Uptown? And also, what is the infant mortality rate now? Any idea? I know that it's gentrified, but how has it changed? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, I don't think the infant mortality rate's very high there now. When we moved in from the South, we had children and people already with a number of different poisonings, from the runoff from the strip mines and the coal mines in the South. So children were much more susceptible to that as far as, learning abilities. And when we would enroll them into the school system in Chicago, the system would automatically put them back 2 to 3, 1 to 2 grades, because they didn't think that they could keep up with the Chicago school system, but there was no testing done there for, lead poisoning. And at that time, there was still lead poisoning in the buildings because it had just been painted over.
Mm-hmm.
And so that contributed to, many illnesses and deaths, in the Uptown area, as well as, people moving in had black lung disease from the coal mine, and brown lung disease from textiles, and many other illnesses, and also poisoning, from the mines.
Mm-hmm. So in other words, the families that moved in, they were already sick, and then plus with the lead that aggravated whatever illnesses that they already had, because if the parents were affected by the poisonings, that would affect their offspring, their children as well.
Absolutely. It was passed on to generations, and until they started doing some treatments for this, it just went from generation to generation. And it just affected the entire family, as well as down south, people with black lung disease and tuberculosis and all that are much more susceptible.
Well, there was more tuberculosis at that time throughout the city, wasn't there?
Yes, I mean, they had TB sanitariums there, I think it's called, and they closed all those down.
Mm-hmm.
But there were no health services for people, and certainly no health services if you didn't have insurance, because the hospitals in the area, would not even take you in.
We'll get to that. Yeah, we'll get to that because you described that very well about what the Black Panthers were doing. This is WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM. And we have with us at WZRD, Hy Thurman, author of Revolutionary Hillbilly. And what you're describing to us, Hy, fits into our theme of the show today, transitions, because you made transitions and you saw a lot of transitions. You also described the Black Panther Party police patrols. Let's get back to what we were talking about with the police brutality. So the Black Panther Party police patrols were patrolling and capturing police misconduct. Are there many such patrols now in Chicago? And if so, how have they increased? Do you have any insight on that?
Well, I don't know if there's patrols there now. There's a lot of cell phones,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of social media. We only had cameras where we had to go out and actually photograph police brutality and abuse, and that would be catching them doing something, beating people or harassing people, which was pretty much all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And if they were spotting us, doing the police patrols, doing the patrol, they would a lot of times confiscate the camera. Except what happened in Uptown was there were always two cameras. One of them was a nice like Nikon or whatever, and the other one was an old Brownie camera.
Mm-hmm.
And so one person would be taking the pictures, and if the cops spotted them, they would, the person would pass that camera on to someone else that would run with it, and they would give the old Brownie camera to the cops, and the cops would destroy it, thinking they destroyed the evidence.
Well, you were one of the runners. You described that in your book.
Yeah, well, my brother was actually one of the runners too, basically. Yeah. And they would, run it and then use it later on in some of our newspapers and, some of our propaganda that we put out at that time. But we copied that from the Black Panthers. They were the first to do it.
When you got that footage, so you only and the Black Panthers, they will only use it for their own media publications. If they were to release that to the mainstream media, would the mainstream media take it?
Well, it wouldn't in Chicago because Mayor Daley controlled all the newspapers. He only let them report what he wanted to report.
And if they didn't, what were the consequences if they didn't follow his rule?
Well, he had a lot of power. He had a lot of power on these boards. He had his people on these boards, and the consequences was, like the Trump followers now. They don't want to be, kicked out of Trump's graces, and that's the way Mayor Daley was. He was. Everybody was trying to get in his graces, and so he would not allow or did not allow anything coming out of usually the poor communities, because he didn't want he didn't want the people in the surrounding areas or in the suburban areas to know that there were slums in Chicago. But also he used slums to get federal funds, you see, so he knew how to play politics and he knew how to play the government. You know, so he controlled pretty much whatever was put into the media. You know, up until the Democratic National Convention, some of it started changing when a lot of the press were beaten and abused by the press. I mean, by the police.
Mhm.
So
And why did they beat the press? Because the press was covering something that Daley did not want them to cover.
yeah, well, yes, and the Democratic National Convention, it was called a police riot. You know, where the police just totally went berserk and started beating everybody that was in their path. They didn't care who it was, clergy, press, you know, anybody that was in their path. And they were there to set an example of law enforcement. You know, so they didn't care. They just rioted, and it was termed as a police riot.
How did it help Daley to impress to make the city look good to the suburbs?
Well, he wanted the city to look good in the suburbs so he could bring those people who had left the city and moved into the suburban areas. He wanted to bring them back into the city because, you know, these were generally white, you know, upper middle class people at the time that he wanted to bring back into the city, and therefore bring in that revenue and make the city. I mean, he wanted to make the city a pretty white city. You know, he didn't care anything about minorities. You know, he was a racist, and so that's what he had intended to do, was to bring them back in, and he's done that now, or they have done that, not him, but through gentrification. But he started it.
In 1964, the student group, Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, organized the JOIN, which is Jobs or Income Now Community Union. What did JOIN accomplish for Uptown?
Okay, well, JOIN came into the community actually to help people find jobs, because at that time, and it's been verified, and that the Uptown community's unemployment rate was 47%. That's a lot. And there were more people out of jobs in Uptown than there were jobs in Chicago. And there were no services to help them at all. And so JOIN came in to help, SDS came in to help people find jobs, but they suddenly figured out that there were more problems there than unemployment. You know, that was slum living and police brutality, lack of health care, lack of, you know, maintenance, street maintenance, you know, a lot of slum landlords were, you know, taking advantage of the renters. You know, so basically what they did was they came in and started working with, you know, some of the people in the community. And Uptown was ripe at that time for all kinds of organizing, you know, because of the oppression from the city and from the police and the politicians, slum landlords, you know, and businesses that were taking advantage of the poor. And so they came in and said, well, let's fight. There were other organizations like Voice of the People that had done a great job fighting for housing. And then when JOIN came in, they kind of filtered out and did a number of different things, you know, as far as teaching people, you know, political ideology, organizing, getting some people together. So one of the real first acts that they did was to get together with community people and march on the what was called the Somerdale Police Station,
Mhm.
Foster Avenue, and against police brutality. And then, of course, after that, their office was attacked and other people were attacked. And after that, one of our members was actually murdered. And so they did a lot. They helped develop food co-ops, rent control, rent strikes, to force the landlords to, to fix up their building. They actually had some buildings that the community controlled.
How was that? How could that happen?
Well, they managed to get some of the landlords to let them control the building and run the building.
Mhm. So
and
the landlord was able to get a good deal out of that, because then the landlord didn't have to do that much, or how did the tenants contribute together to maintain the building? How was that implemented?
Mhm. Well, they did that too, but some of these landlords were sympathetic, to what they were trying to do,
Mhm.
and they would support it, and they would, of course, put more money into the building too. But it was just a headache for these landlords. They didn't want to put up with being a target, of the community.
Mhm.
And so it did contribute, and they still made a profit out of it, but it was rent controlled. It wasn't anything where rent kept going up and up and up.
Yeah, how were you able to implement rent control? Because the city council definitely wouldn't help. What kind of rent control did you have?
Well, the rent control was made up basically by the community and the owner of the building, about how much rent and what rent could be paid. And so it was an agreement of, whoever lived there, and it's sort of like a low income buildings now, except that time it was very, very low. And so it was negotiations that was worked out, with the landlords at that time, the property owners.
Mhm. What were living conditions like in buildings such as those with the rent control, and also where the residents had a say into how to manage the building?
Well, the residents did it because it was formed as a somewhat of a co-op or a
Mhm.
collective, where they formed their own collective, they had their own spokesman. And so it was negotiations, and it was made within this collective of tenants that lived there. Much like there are some buildings in Uptown now, which is owned by cooperatives, which is like a nonprofit organization, and people buy, one flat. And so there's 6 or 8 different families in this one flat. And they come together as a corporation to take care of the building, take care of the landscape, anything else that needs to be done. Although that was good, they had a better place to live there, but some of the other slum conditions wasn't very good. I lived in a few buildings that was cockroach rat infested. You turn the light on at night, it looked like a whole carpet moving because it'd be cockroaches.
Right.
And
Right.
rats walking, eating through the wall and biting children, but these landlords didn't care. They didn't live in the area, so they really didn't care, so, but those conditions and those rent controlled buildings was much, much more favorable
Mhm.
than the regular slum living.
You did mention that there are co-ops now. I think we kind of heard of one. So there are these housing co-ops still in Uptown, but there aren't many, right?
There aren't many. I only know of a couple of buildings, and those buildings were bought during the time of the transition from, urban renewal.
Mhm.
And these buildings were bought basically by by people that wanted to stay in the community. So therefore, they were also eligible for, for funds to help fix that building up too.
Mhm.
So if you go to Uptown now, you'll notice that almost every building has a gate in front of it, and it's all been remodeled or rebuilt.
What kind of funds did they have access to? Because any funds that were funneled to the city, you mentioned in the book, they took over and would not release it to the community. So what kind of funds were these co-ops able to access?
Well, these co-ops were able, because they were able to get, I think, bank loans sometime. They were able to get other types of loans other than, going to the city. And so some of the people that moved into these were, professional people usually, so they had a means, of funds anyway. And so it was easier for them to get these buildings. But they did have to build, the city had to build some low income buildings, by, I guess, regulation of the federal government. And so there's a couple of those around the area now too, but not a lot of them.
Mhm. Please describe how the Rainbow Coalition came to be and coalition's most important victory and the greatest missed opportunity.
Well, the Rainbow Coalition came to be it was created by the Black Panthers, the Young Lords, which was a Hispanic gang in the Lakeview area, Lincoln Park area, that became politicized, and by the Young Patriots, which was, a group of us that were from the South. We were all experiencing the same conditions in our community. With the Young Patriots, we were experiencing, of course, those slum living conditions, police brutality, lack of health care, malnutrition, all these. And we worked as a group of young adults. I was 18 when I started, we started working with the Young Patriots, and there were just a few of us, but we would show up at meetings, voice our opinions. We would organize in the community, and at times protect the community. But we were beginning to be pretty well known as some of the leadership within the community. And so we had always admired the Black Panthers, and we had voiced that. Now we had also had some of them had also had some experience with the Black Panthers prior, when Eldridge Cleaver was running for president of the United States, and they wanted a poor white person to run as vice president. So they got Peggy Terry, who was a poor welfare recipient, former Klan member, Ku Klux Klan member, to run as a vice president. So they ran a presidential campaign in the Peace and Freedom Party out of California against George Wallace and his racist, views. Of course, we didn't win, but we made an inroad in showing how, interracial organizations can work together and people can work together. But we'd already had some contact, so they knew a little bit about it. And so, the Young Patriots was at a meeting, and we didn't know that we did not a community meeting, and we didn't know that the Panthers would be there. And this was down in the Lakeview area. And this was basically made up of middle class and upper middle class white people who would have an organization come in once a month, and they would learn from them. And we showed up, and we didn't know that the Panthers were there. And so we gave our presentation, and we were literally almost kicked out of the place by these these people. They thought that, you know, we wanted charity, you know, they want to know why our families were not, you know, working like they should. And then, and that we were just looked at as, you know, basically just white trash. Well, Bobby Lee of the Panthers was there and he stood up and defended us, you know, and that's where we started getting recognized more by the Panthers. And there's a documentary that was done about that period of time called American Revolution 2. Just so happened that the people doing the documentary had heard that this was going to happen and filmed and showed up and filmed it. But
And what year was that?
this was in 1968. And then one of the Black Panthers, Bobby Lee, he was in charge of the North Side. He came up to and actually lived with us in Uptown for a couple of weeks. And then he went back to Fred Hampton, the leader of the Black Panthers, and said, you know, there's these crazy hillbillies on the North Side talking revolution. And so that's when we started being recognized, and that's when we were brought into the Rainbow Coalition with the Black Panthers and the Young Lords. But that's how that came about.
Whose idea was the name of Rainbow Coalition?
Fred Hampton named it that. Yeah, he thought that would be a good name for it.
So what was the greatest missed opportunity and the most important victory of the Rainbow Coalition?
Well, the most important Rainbow Coalition was, I would say that it actually existed, that it actually worked. You know, it actually worked with these three so different organizations, and especially the, you know, the Southern people being involved in it, because if, you know, if we had to, we were asked to go to a program or a demonstration or anything like that, march with the Black Panthers or the Young Lords, whoever sponsored it, if it was the Panthers, we would become a Panther, and we would, you know, drop our identity basically as the Young Patriots and just become one of them, and take, you know, direction from them without question. And they would do the same for us. And so that's one of the things that made it so dangerous, is because, you know, we all became one. And that is why, you know, they brought in, Mayor Daley brought in the COINTELPRO, had J. Edgar Hoover to come in. And that's also why he developed the war on gangs. He was so afraid that we were going to get some power, and we were getting power. Now, because, you know, he came up in a gang. It's called the Hamburgs, on which they called an athletic association, but it was really a gang. So he knew the extent of gangs getting power, you know, plus the fact that the regular street gangs also supported us, you know, at that time. So that made it even more, they weren't part of the organization, but that made it even more dangerous. And it's, you know, it's showing some of that in the movie Judas and the Black Messiah, which just came out too, where the negotiations or talks between, you know, the gangs and the Panthers, and the Rainbow Coalition. But it was a very dangerous time because it suddenly put us in a lot of danger. And we became one because we also opened up all three organizations opened up free health clinics, free food programs, legal programs, police, you know, brutality programs. We actually made Bobby Lee, a Black Panther, chairman of our police brutality program. And we served, Young Patriots served as security for the Black Panthers and the Young Lords when we could.
You said there were three organizations doing all this work. So it's the Young Patriots, the Rainbow Coalition, and what is the third?
the Black Panthers, the Young Lords, and
see.
the Young Patriots.
Yes.
Later on, Rising Up Angry came in, which was another organization that worked with basically white greasers. SDS was a part of it, but the three main organizations were the Patriots, the Lords, and the Panthers.
Mhm. So, was there any opportunity that was missed when you look back at it now, at all that you were doing at that time?
Yeah, I think some of the opportunity that was missed was that we were all working on housing programs, at the same time. We'd started moving from other areas into trying to get property. And I know that the Panthers were trying to get property at the time that Fred Hampton was murdered. But that was because of that was a missed opportunity, because it had an opportunity to get more and more poor people into decent housing. I think that was one of the missed opportunities that we had. And of course the other was probably getting more progressives, radicals, community people into politics. Bobby Rush, who is a senator now, he was one of the founders of the Black Panthers in Chicago, and one of the founders of the Rainbow Coalition. He's a sitting congressman now. Other people, like our politics led to the election of the first Black mayor in Chicago.
Harold Washington. Yes.
Harold Washington. It brought, of course, Bobby Rush was elected to state senate first, and he beat out a guy named Barack Obama, and then Barack Obama used the platform of the Rainbow Coalition to get into the White House. We never got any credit for it. But,
did you support Barack Obama during the election? Did you do any field work for him?
Well, that was back, the Patriots and the Lords and the Panthers. We had to go underground for a while, but that was later on that Obama had ran. It was later on.
Because you had to go underground because of that COINTEL, right?
Yes. Yeah, because of the state repression that was put up on us. Many people there were many more murders after that. There were, and then Fred Hampton, was murdered. We had a few of our people murdered, and so did the Young Lords, literally murdered. So we knew that, things were getting kind of hot, so a lot of us left. Some of us kind of stayed around. I kind of stayed around because I wanted to defend my, my education, but I eventually left. I had to leave and went underground and stayed down, for a number of years.
So is there any current Fred Hampton who was a threat to people such as Daley? And is there any entity right now that resembles Daley that is causing gentrification and perhaps maintaining part of the status quo that you had to endure?
Well, I think that, with any city, there's going to be those people who, and politicians who's going to try to remain the status quo. And you have to look out for various types of dangerous situations that you might get into. You can look around the country now and probably one of the biggest is Donald Trump, and his influence, and look around the country and see what's going on in terms of, in Florida, it's illegal to feed homeless people. In Tennessee, a person can literally run over someone with a car that's protesting. And so on and on and on, that they're trying to remain the status quo. And a lot of this came up with the Black Lives Matter movement. But what we're looking at now is there's more violence being bestowed upon this country with the right-wing militias. And those are the ones that's trying to, some of them trying to remain with the status quo, but others are just trying to destroy everything. And so that's what we have to look out for now. That's what we're constantly looking out for.
In other words, you're saying that all that you've done has helped make progress, and then there are those that want to destroy that progress.
Oh, yes. And they have over the years, at one time, of course, there were no free lunch programs or breakfast programs for children in schools, but now they're there. Free clinics. There's free clinics around the area, or clinics that, they're run by, different organizations. And one of the biggest areas of, I think, nonprofits, people have become involved in a lot of nonprofit organizations that's controlled by, the status quo, or by boards of people that are banks or, from the capitalist system. And they're not allowed, they're not going to allow it to go back to, socialist ideology. And so that's one of the things that's happening in this country now. Those that are, if you even talk about doing something for the people, then you're the enemy of the status quo.
So in other words, you're saying that a lot of the nonprofits are not actually helping the people. They're just trying to get funding.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I know some that were community boards, people on the board, and now they have bankers and they have other, influences on there that, that's changed their whole direction, So that's happening, and they got to be careful because they can lose their funding or lose their jobs, basically. So I think that's one of the biggest problems now with nonprofits. They figured out ways to buy everything off, to buy the system, our system.
So what you're saying is that there are the organizations that are helping the community. They're not necessarily nonprofits, but then the nonprofits are saying that they are helping the community. They're trying to take over those organizations that are actually helping the community.
Yes, if they can. And it's up to the leadership of that other organization if they want to be that type of a nonprofit, or bring people on board, that would change, the whole direction of the organization. So all of a sudden, I've always said that rich people and poor people don't think alike. When you bring money into the equation, people start thinking differently, and they don't really want to, continue. It changes a lot of people's, who they are, what their beliefs are. It changes a lot of their beliefs.
You mean money? Once the money comes into it.
Money. Mm-hmm.
Are you able to provide any examples to us about organizations that were helping the community, but then now have had to change because of what we were just discussing?
Well, that's something that I try to stay away from.
Okay.
I let the community do it. So I'd feel kind of uncomfortable doing that. There are plenty of them.
Mhm. Well, then let's do it this way then. Do you know of any watchdog groups that are investigating this? And what have they been investigating?
Well, I don't think there's any watchdog groups that's been doing that I know of, hearsay, but I don't think there are. I don't know of any.
Mhm. Um, let's see. You described how you were uneducated and reading at the grade school level when you arrived in Chicago. But what was your break in overcoming that obstacle?
Well, one of the breaks I had was one of the jobs that I took when I was just 17 was, and I needed a job at that point, was with Vista, which is AmeriCorps now, I believe.
Mhm. Yes.
And then when I turned 18, actually, I became a conscientious objector to the war in Vietnam. And then I took the job of Vista volunteer. And I had to do an alternative service, which was 2 years in Vista. And then I became involved in a organization called the People's School in Uptown. And I had to, part of the agreement for me having that job was, which allowed me to organize at the same time, was that I would have to complete my GED. And so I started working on my GED and learning from there, which was extremely difficult, reading on that level.
What kind of help did you get? Did you have any help?
Yeah, I had some tutors that helped me, and I started out with very basic readers. I had tutors and I had other people that helped me. But although, I was organizing at the same time in the Uptown area, and this was when Northeastern entered into the picture. Mm-hmm. Stanley Newman, who was with the anthropology department, came into the community and said that he wanted to explore the idea of starting a center from Northeastern into the Uptown community. And so he had gotten together with a woman who was a social worker where I was at. This was with the YWCA I was with. And she had gotten some people together to talk about this and brought me into it. And so we started developing the center out of Northeastern. I think it was called Chicago's Teachers College North at that time or something. It was not a university. And there was the Beehive and I think one other building there. And so we were enrolling people into Northeastern that normally would not be able to go to college. Some of these people had a high school diploma, others did not, like me. And we had to go to the community college YMCA community college to build up our grades, and so we could go to transfer into Northeastern. And so it was very difficult, very hard, having to learn all this. And so that was a break for me also, because I was able to get a number of different tutors, in a number of different areas. And we started developing well, first of all, I got funded by the Illinois State Scholarship Commission at that time, and Northeastern, because all the classes that we developed had field work attached to it, and we were somewhat paid for that field work. And Jerome Sachs was the president at that time of the school of university, and he very much believed in trying to get these poor folks into college, because one of the ways of beating poverty is through education. And so from that, we were able to develop curriculums, which was history and culture, the Native American, Hispanic American, American. We had classes, Black Power, community dynamics, community organization 1 and 2, history and culture of the Asian Americans. So it was all geared toward, community involvement, basically. And so that brought students from the campus to our center. And then we were able to go from our center to the campus, to get the necessary classes that we needed. It was very successful. We had people from all different nationalities and cultures involved, and quite a few people did graduate from it. I was one of them with a degree in anthropology. And then I was hired and I worked for the school another year in helping teach some classes.
You helped to develop a curriculum too, right?
Yes, and a lot of that became part of the human services at Northeastern. Because the time I graduated, it became a university. So yeah, we brought along a lot of people. We actually had some people that worked for Northeastern and actually retired from Northeastern. People became firemen, doctors, lawyers. Some people went back to their own country to work. And so it was very successful until Ronald Reagan came in. And I think he's the one that cut all the funding for it.
And it never came back, the funding?
No, never did. As a matter, and with Northeastern now, I think in the archives of it was called the Uptown People's Northeastern Illinois University Center. I think there's 2 boxes of archives, and that's all that's there. And I've talked to people over the years there at Northeastern about it. No one knows anything about it. So it's something that's just kind of been forgotten, but means a lot, for those of us that went through it, because we owe Northeastern quite a bit. And there's some still around. There's quite a few people. Of course, older. I'm 71 years old, but there's some that's a little younger and some that's a little older that's still around.
When you developed the curriculum, and were you responsible for putting the fieldwork component into those classes?
Yes. Yeah, the way they worked is if someone was working, someone was taking the course of history and culture of the Southern migrant, for instance, we'll say. That's a 3-credit course with a 2-credit fieldwork.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a whole different type of program for the fieldwork, whereas I did mine, I couldn't do mine with my people, my culture. I had to go somewhere else. So I went to the American Indian Center. Mm-hmm. Those people that were with the Native Americans, a lot of them went to work with Hispanic organizations or others, or community organizations and national organizations. So we were able to learn, basically it was to foster the understanding of all the peoples. And we would have international days with international people would come in their native dress or bring their foods and would do their dances and their culture.
So the alumni come back and have reunions, because if it were successful, then and it had an effect on your lives, that might happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to be able to have a reunion with these people. You know, the people that were there that are left. You know, most people are passing away, but you know, I've tried with Northeastern over the years to do something, and nothing's ever happened. But I would love to be able to
When,
able to do something.
yes, of course. When you mentioned that your work with Vista, and then working in, is it the People's Army, right? Is that what it's called, the People's Center or
No.
People's Army?
Well, it was the where I worked was a people's school.
People's Schools, sorry.
Mhm.
So did you have a choice in choosing that organization to work with for your Vista responsibilities, because you chose it to be back in Uptown, your haunts?
Yeah, I wanted to be in Uptown, absolutely. And they wanted me to be working there, you know, so they were very much a good sponsor, you know. Yeah, they wanted me to work there with the school and in the community, because I was already organizing in the community, because I had founded the first drug abuse program on the north side of Chicago. It was
What was it called? What was it
Emerald
called?
City.
Oh.
No, Emerald City, and it was the pre-epidemic uptown for drugs at the time. Mostly it was alcohol, but drugs were really coming into the community. That eventually became part of the mental health center. But I had already done some organizing, you know, and with the Young Patriots and other things too. And wanted to, you know, worked with the Southern Culture Exchange Center and other places that were there. So I had already done some, you know, some organizing.
Was this before or after you had to go underground?
Oh, this is all before.
Mhm.
Yeah, this was in 67, 68 when I did the drug abuse program.
Oh, so you were already active. So what was the year for when you started working at that center that was like a part of the offshoot of NEIU in Uptown? What was the year of that then?
It was in 68,
Oh,
1968.
that's a lot of what happened then happened in the 1968, what you were
Yes.
describing in your book.
Yeah, and it was the days of rage. I mean, there were all kinds of things going on, you know, so we were involved, you know, in the community. Northeastern was heavily involved in the community at that point with the Uptown Center.
Mhm.
And so, you know, we were very much involved.
What's become of the Uptown Center?
It's gone. It's been gone for years, since Ronald Reagan came in, cut the funding, and it just never did come back after that.
And Truman College came in and what year?
Well, Truman was gradual. It started destroying the area. Started coming in the, you know, the 70s, and it didn't get there until probably 76 or something. You know, but it was gradual in coming in and removing people. It had a lot of obstacles because Uptown was the last of those communities to become gentrified because of the organizing that's been going on in Uptown over the years. It took them about 50 years to get all this gentrification done. Whereas other communities, they were able to go right in and restore the community the way they want it. But Uptown has always been a boiling point for organizing. We're going to try to do next year maybe the history of Uptown and work on some areas there. You know, but I'm in Alabama now, so.
Oh, so you're not too familiar with what the main issues are in Uptown right now then?
Oh, yes, I'm familiar still with them because I still belong to organizations and, you
Okay.
know, I
So
still, yes.
what issues then do we have to address now in Uptown and that
Well,
are still
yeah,
addressable?
issues that we have to address is the housing issue. And it always goes back to the housing issue for, for poor and working class people. We've been kicked around and kicked out and of course the issues that, that the alderman Capelman and those others would see was, getting rid of everybody and gentrifying the community and, when you put millions of dollars into renovating the Uptown Theater and not put it into anything for the, poor people, that's a problem. And so that's still an issue. Housing is still an issue for trying to get some people back in with low income housing. I don't know if that's going to happen.
Were there any successes over the year for low income housing in Uptown?
Yeah, there's a couple. There's a few of them there, but I think it's probably seems to be at a stalemate right now, in the community.
When you mentioned that Uptown was the last part of the city to be gentrified. So in other words, you're saying that the whole city is on track to be gentrified. There aren't any last bastions of non-gentrification.
Well, let me take that back. I would have to say that some of the area where they're putting the Obama Museum is being gentrified.
Mhm.
See, it's still on a continued basis of always being gentrified.
Mhm.
So I would say that it took them 50 years to get it done in our community, but it was the last of the ones that took that long, like Lincoln Park and was one that was being gentrified at the time, and that got done very, very quickly, and then Uptown did not.
So for the gentrification, there is still work to be done now that to kind of reverse the process at all. You're saying that there's almost nothing that could be done, but let's put it this way. When did the mental health clinics close? You mentioned that in the book. So under whose administration and who was responsible for that?
The mental health,
Yes.
well, the mental health clinics closed. It was Ronald Reagan that was responsible for closing all those down during his time. And the city, the city of Chicago never reopened them. And that dumped just thousands of mental patients, mentally challenged people into these communities, and Uptown was saturated with them. They had what they called halfway houses that they put them into. But basically they were just given medication and put out on the street, so there was a large number of people, running around either wanting, food, either wanting, drugs. There were not all of them, but some of them were pretty violent people. But there was no real care for them. There were so many of them that there couldn't be enough counselors, social
Why?
work.
Why were they congregating in Uptown? Was it because there were a lot of mental health centers around there that closed, and then that was their point out back into society, or was there something about Uptown that attracted the people who no longer had access to mental health care?
Well, it was easier to put them into a poor community than it is put them into a middle class or an upper middle class white community. I know that some went to other Black communities, but it was easier just to dump them into a poor community that was but that was insignificant anyway.
Who did the dumping?
That was the Department of Mental Health.
So they closed the clinics and then they just brought them to brought the patients to Uptown, and then did they give them money? What did they do? Did they put them on the
No.
street and then leave them? What happened?
They would, they had to stay in these halfway houses,
Got it. Mhm.
and they would have to go there, depending on what their medication is. They'd have to, get medicated, plus they'd have to go back there for their meals, and they'd have to sleep there also. So most of them were very, very medicated.
Mhm. So in other words, you're saying that the federal government, or was it the city, who was it that built all these halfway houses in Uptown? So you're saying that there's a preponderance, a big number of halfway houses in Uptown.
Well, they were private. They were privately owned,
Mm,
and therefore they were a business, that made a lot of money,
mhm. And
and never took care of them. I mean, they never really took care of them. They just wandered around.
so
And-
what, mhm. Do you know what branch of government privatized them and privatized these halfway houses and was responsible for them opening?
Well, it wasn't really the government that privatized them. I think they allowed them to be privatized. Like the drug clinics, the methadone clinics that were around. It should have been the Department of Mental Health that was responsible, but they didn't really care. I mean, it was fine with them as long as someone was privatizing and making money. It was just one of the problems that they didn't have to deal with.
Okay.
And I'm sure they got some federal funds from them too, but most of it was, the medications. I'm sure the federal government was charged, substantial amount for their medication and their care.
In other words, you're saying that a lot of neighborhoods did not allow these halfway houses to be built, but in Uptown, these private owners were able to build the halfway houses, and that's why Uptown became such a place where there's that high population of former mental health patients.
Absolutely. Who's gonna control it? They would much rather bring people in at that point with these mental problems, because they would see that as just another deterioration of the community. So it would be easier for them to urban renewal the community. And you want to keep poor people all in one spot, all in one location, like they wanted to keep the Blacks, the Hispanics, and other Asians, other people right in in their own community. And so they wanted to keep the poor people, in one location, and so they wouldn't go into or spill out into other communities. And their purpose was to gentrify the community anyway.
Mhm.
So it was only a temporary fix for these these mental patients that really needed some care, and they didn't get the care. It was just almost catastrophic, to have all these people in a community like that, that were constantly running around, free to roam everywhere.
Mhm. So in other words, the zoning committee of the city council made it easy for these halfway houses to open up for business in Uptown.
Not sure. Yeah. You could open up in Uptown, but you couldn't open up you couldn't go down to Lincoln Park, or you couldn't go over to Andersonville. You couldn't go up to, Rogers Park and those places that were, economically better off, but you could go into Uptown and some of the other poor communities around the city and open up these halfway houses.
Mhm. What years were you living in Rogers Park?
I lived in Rogers Park 2 years. I think it was somewhere around 73, 74.
And at that time, Rogers Park was very different from Uptown?
Yes,
Mhm.
yes, it was very different from Uptown. And then after that, it started deteriorating some because, people had no other place to go from the city. Plus the fact that they had closed down. See, they closed down the housing projects and dispersed people all over the city, but it was mostly into the poor communities, that they would put them. And so Uptown, received a lot of people from the housing projects. They had no other place to go. They went some into Rogers Park and other places up in that area. So it was all a part of a dumping. It's Uptown was really a dumping ground for everything.
But you said that they still wanted to gentrify Uptown. So do you have any insight about what they're planning to do with these people when they do gentrify? Because there's what happens if maybe some of the halfway houses close? Oh, have you seen anything, any indication of what is happening?
Oh, it's already been done. They're not there anymore. There's a halfway house, but I'm not sure how many people are involved in it. But that's really not there anymore. They've already gentrified Uptown. They've pretty well already gotten rid of the poor people. Most of the poor people have gone out into, ironically, the suburban areas. And sort of the surrounding areas of Chicago, or, be it the Southern people. Most of them have gone other places. All the American Indians, they were dispersed also, and they had to go back to their reservations or wherever they're going. And the Hispanics, the same. And so, there are some organizations around like Jesus People that work with people, poor people, but very few. And the mental patients haven't been there for a while. They've had a chance, I don't know where they've all gone. I really don't. But there's not a lot of them there now that I know of that I've seen. It's mostly yuppies, it's in the area. It's mostly what we used to call upwardly mobile people, so businesses that's moved in, or, restaurants, for instance. There was a bookstore there that we used to go to all the time, and they paid, very little rent. And all of a sudden they jacked their rent up to $5,000 a month. And they had to move out. So, that kind of thing's happening. The property values have really gone sky high in the Uptown community. And it's chic for some people to live in Uptown.
Yeah. This is WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM. And we have with us at Wizard now, Hy Thurman, author of Revolutionary Hillbilly, and via Zoom. And so we are continuing the interview now. So you have no idea where these mental health patients went. The poor people went back to their individual communities. Like, so you're saying that some of maybe the Southern whites, they went back to Appalachia?
Well, yeah, a lot of them did. Now, there was what was called a migrant circle.
Yes.
People would come into Chicago, for instance, and you can't make it there. You'd move on to Detroit. Chances are you're not going to make it there, but a lot of people made it in Detroit because of the auto industry at the time. Other people went to Ohio, in that circle, because Ohio did have some steel mills, and Indiana. And a lot of people just finally went back, back to their hometown. But the majority of them did go back. Some of them did remain with jobs. Some people, there are some who managed to make it fairly well, who actually was able to buy some property in the surrounding areas of Uptown, but Uptown had redlined, the banks had redlined the community, and you couldn't buy someone from the community if you were from the South, for instance. They wouldn't sell the property to you. So some of them that owned the business would move out into other areas of the city, or out into, say, Round Lake Beach up north, some of those areas. And
over there, they were able to purchase property then?
Yes, they were, but not in Uptown because it was redlined, against people buying it, because they didn't want us owning any property. And that was very true with these committees with urban renewal. They wouldn't allow us to sit on their committees. They said you had to be a property owner. But on the other hand, they wouldn't allow anyone to buy property in the Uptown community.
And there wasn't anybody to advocate for you at that time?
Not really. We just did it as we had what was called the Uptown Area People's Planning Coalition, in which we came together in several different organizations and fought and produced, and developed that Hank Williams Village. That and an organization called Voice of the People were pretty much advocates run by the community.
So you wanted to build the Hank Williams Village. Was it there? Was it existing for some time, or was it never built?
It was never built. It was called the greatest housing plan that never was. It was written up in the Chicago magazine, Chicago Tribune. Several other articles have been written about it, but it was a very good program. It was a very good housing program that could have worked, but they didn't. They, being the city of Chicago, at a secret, council meeting, voted it down.
In May 1968, when you were members of JOIN, Goodfellows and Native American Committee traveled to Washington, D.C. to Resurrection City to shed light on the plight of the poor. You mentioned that the food was poisoned on your commute to Resurrection City. Was that just food poisoning, or was someone trying to derail the project?
Yeah, well, the Goodfellows first was pre-Young Patriots. We called ourselves the Goodfellows. So that's where that name came from. But we were poisoned en route to Resurrection City, the Poor People's Campaign. That was deliberate. We know it was deliberate. It was happening to other, caravans that were going there. We picked up the food, and it was poisoned when we got it.
Do you know what kind of poison?
I don't remember the name of it. Just some bad food poisoning. I was laid up for about a week and a half. Couple of people had to go in the hospital, but it was pretty bad. But it was deliberate, at that point.
So was that part of COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program work?
Well, this was even before COINTELPRO was brought in, but it was still, the government, knew, what the civil rights movement was about. It could have been a militia, it could have been a right-wing organization that did it. We're not sure exactly who did it.
So you mentioned in the Revolutionary Hillbilly that the first Mayor Daley used federal funds for the poor and blighted areas only to enrich his cronies. Are there any current city committees to help the poor now? I know that you're living in Alabama, so but are you aware of anything in the city now that any city committees that do try to help the poor?
Well, I'm sure there are. I don't know of any, but I do know that there's, a lot of them say they do, with the city, but they never really help the people that they need to be helping, because it just seems like people are always protesting against the city, and I think there might be some Band-Aid, organizations around or committees around, but I don't think the city is still very interested in helping the poor very, very well. We did have an alderwoman that was elected out of Uptown and served 22 years. It's Helen Schiller. And she was very effective in getting those low-income housing into Uptown. But it just seems like since she's not in office anymore, it's just an uphill battle all the time. And so I don't know of any county committees that's there to help people.
Okay. So you, of course, you described the urban renewal program, which was the poor people removal program. So would you say that this is still going on now? So it's just another. So gentrification is just another word for that, right? Is that what
It's
you're
just,
saying?
yes, it's just another name for it. They don't call it urban renewal anymore. I don't know if all the federal funds have been depleted, for urban renewal, but I do know that gentrification that's going on through land developers and real estate are the ones now that are, that are gentrifying the community. So it's more of a local program now by, the city and the communities. So it would be the banks, the land developers, the investment firms, the politicians that's doing that. Because I don't know if I think urban renewal is pretty well burned itself out, completed its purpose, specifically in Uptown it has.
Mhm.
I don't know of any other parts of the country. I do know that when there's a new movie made called Judas and the Black Messiah about Fred Hampton and others, they had to go to Cleveland to find a community that looked like Chicago, because Chicago has been changed so much.
What's the name of the film again?
Judas and the Black Messiah.
Okay. So you said that the urban renewal funds have pretty much been depleted, but so in your estimation, there wasn't any urban renewal done with the urban renewal funds. It was mostly just gentrification, nothing that actually helped the people then.
Right. Now, urban renewal was quite a program. It went on for a long time.
Mhm.
Urban renewal was backed by, the United States government and housing, HUD, Housing and Urban Development, and others that brought a lot of money into these communities, into these cities. They were supposed to renew these structures or tear them down, and that was their whole purpose, and that's what they did. And so I don't know what kind of funding is available now. Probably there is some through HUD, Housing and Urban Development, but a lot of the gentrification that's going on now is a little different from urban renewal, because it has all the developers and banks and realties, real estates, companies and everybody else involved. So it just seems to be more of a local endeavor. than Urban Renewal. But Urban Renewal went on for a long time.
So right now it's a local endeavor, but before you're saying urban renewal was it just was it the federal government giving the money to the city and then the city spending it to just gentrify and get rid of the poor people?
Yeah, basically that's what it is.
Mhm.
That's exactly what it was. And it did get rid of the poor people because it just dispersed people out of the community. And it was funded by the federal government. It would give cities money, and Mayor Daley said that he wouldn't accept any of that money unless he could control it.
Mhm.
And that's how he got his money, and he did control it, in the way that he wanted it done. And unfortunately, that was not a very good move for the poor.
Please describe the Young Patriots Clinic and whether there is a current incarnation of the clinic. Are there any such clinics in Chicago doing similar work?
Well, yeah, there's kind of a couple there, I believe, but I know that there's one here in Alabama, which is called the Free Clinic here in Huntsville, Alabama, which is pretty much along the same structure as the free clinics, but they're not. They're kind of privately funded now. We did do a benefit for them recently to raise some money, but the Young Patriot Clinic, of course, was to help, to help alleviate the health conditions within our town, within Uptown.
Right.
People would come in and get examined. Depending on what the treatment they needed, they can get the treatment at the clinic. If they needed surgery or other extensive type of health care, we would take them to one of the hospitals because we were staffed by a number of different licensed physicians, nurses, social workers, that would accompany them to, say, a hospital, so they can get serviced.
So was it a kind of a bit of a volunteering on the part of the health professionals? Because I think you wrote in the book that the people that were treated at the clinic would be the treatment would be worth $3, whereas if they were to go to a hospital to a regular medical setting, it would cost $100. So how did the medical professionals get compensated for working there?
They didn't get compensated. They were 100% volunteer. The doctors and the social workers and the nurses, and they actually paid the rent on the clinic, and brought in all the medication and all the supplies. Now there was a network through the Panthers, the Black Panthers, that helped us get set up. And there were some organizations of doctors that they worked with, and we had professional doctors, from Northwestern, I think it's Passivant, a number of Rush, different doctors coming in, as well as psychiatrists, coming in and donating their time.
How much time did they donate per week, or did it vary?
Well, we were opened one night during the week, and then we were opened Saturdays, in order to get people in. The weekend usually was more for children, but we also, saw adults. We also had a patient advocacy program set up of people in the community, actually, that would advocate for people, when they'd go on they had to go to a hospital, someone would go with them from that advocacy, as well as one of the professionals. They were usually, people were usually referred to hospitals that one of the doctors was involved in that worked in the clinic.
Mhm.
We were harassed all the time. Every location we went to,
Harassed by whom?
by the cops, by the police. Every location that we would go to, the cops would visit the landlord, because we started down the apartments first. And the landlord, they'd go to the landlords and convince them to evict us. Same thing with our Breakfast for Children program. We were completely harassed all the time, including the Hull House in Uptown. But they would threaten, the landlords and convince them that they should evict us. They would harass, cops would harass those, and it's the gang intelligence units and Red Squad, later on COINTELPRO, that would harass the patients to a lot of times take their medications as they came out of the clinic, harass people all the time. They tried harassing, some of the doctors. That didn't work. They actually busted in on a meeting one time that the doctors were having and didn't realize it would be doctors there. They were going to come in and say that we were partying, having a party, but it was a meeting with the doctors. And so that kept persisting until we found a permanent location.
Which was where?
Which was, and it's in Uptown. It was on the corner of Montrose Broadway and Sheridan Road. And there was the building there now, where we had Northeastern is now, it's a chicken hot dog place, but it's right above it, a whole series of offices. And they kept harassing the owner there, and he said he liked what we were doing, and he wasn't going to kick us out. And so they've come into his place and said, you have to have 13 sinks and all this stuff and 5 bathrooms. So they try to harass him. And they're trying to harass him now because he's allowing homeless people to stay up where the clinic was, during cold weather. So they didn't like that. They're trying to get rid of that. And we had an office across the street, which was our office, the Young Patriots.
Mhm.
But
Well,
I'm sorry.
So you were only open one night, a weekday to see patients, and on Saturday night, did you say only
Yeah.
Saturday night? Then you weren't able to see all the patients that really needed your the clinic's help then, because I would imagine that there were a lot of people that needed the help. So how were you able to address that?
Well, we were able to get some of them to go see the doctors independently in their offices. We did see, during that month, we saw hundreds of patients. And we could only use our resources that we had.
Which came from where? Which
those are the doctors and the doctors and the nurses, and we actually had to take over. We went and took over a Department of Health clinic that opened up because they were abusing the people that were coming in for service. They were also restricted hours, and people were getting abused. And tell people, go
how
home.
were they abused?
Well, the way they were treated, they were either refused treatment, or they would tell them, you need to go home and bathe, or, we're not here for you. And it was run by the Department of Health. And
Chicago? Chicago Department of Health?
Yeah, Chicago.
Mhm.
And so the doctors and the social workers and the nurses, the community people went down and actually took over that clinic and demanded that they open better hours, they take more people in, and give them better service. Our doctors offered to help, and they said they couldn't do it because they weren't Department of Health certified, and they arrested. Well, 26 people were arrested, including doctors, everybody, and forced them to change their policies, which is our goal anyway. We weren't trying to run a clinic all the time, but like now, like with the school programs, the feeding the children and the free clinics and all this stuff, that didn't exist before. And the patient bill of rights that you see in the hospitals or anywhere where you go now, that coalition was responsible for that. And so we were responsible for setting up those free clinics that eventually became, free clinics around the country.
Also, there is a ramifications from your work. Then it is set a precedent for free clinics around the country.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
26 that were arrested, those were the doctors and nurses that were working in the clinic.
Doctors and nurses, social workers, and community people.
Mm-hmm. So what became of that? What happened to their cases?
Oh, it was kicked out of court. They dropped the charges. The courts dropped the charges. They didn't want the publicity.
Please describe the origin of the Young Patriots name and how the Young Patriots came to renounce the Confederate flag.
Oh, okay. Well, the Young Patriots, we chose that name because we were talking about the American Revolution and how, the Patriots defended their people and their country. So we said, well, we're defending our people, we're defending our country. Why can't we call ourselves the Young Patriots? But we're not doing it for the reason of the American Revolution was doing it in the capitalist system. We said we're going to defend our people on a more radical basis, or a socialistic basis.
Yeah, defend the poor was how it started.
Yes, defend the poor, defend our community. And so that's how the name came about.
Renouncing the Confederate flag.
The flag itself we used, which was sometimes some people say it was a mistake, other times people say it doesn't. But the Confederate flag for the Southern people, it was there all the time. It was down south, it was up north. You go into bars or anywhere, you'd see this Confederate flag. So it was somewhat invisible, and so we knew that it was a racist symbol. And we thought, what's one of the best ways to get in conversation with people from the South, and especially people that are racist from the South and white supremacy? Because we had the Klan, Ku Klux Klan, American Nazi Party, John Birch Society, everybody in Uptown. I mean, this was people that were very, white supremacists. And so we said, well, let's try using this flag. And it came about by mistake one time because somebody had put a flag on, somehow I got a flag on their jacket or whatever. And it sparked a conversation with people. Well, we thought, well, we're going to have the flag, but we're going to put a free Huey Newton, or, free Puerto Rico or whatever, a button or whatever next to it. And so we ran this by Fred Hampton, And Fred Hampton, he said, well, it's never been done before. It's something that he doesn't like at all as a flag, but he said that since he said we've proven ourselves as being anti-racist, and that if we felt that's an organizing tool in Uptown, then we could, it's okay as far as the coalition's concerned. And so we used a racist symbol to get to racist people. And so we would go into the bars or into any of into the community, and it would be very noticeable. People would see you got a Confederate flag, got free Huey, some kind of button on it and everything, and it sparked a conversation with people, and we were able to talk to people about first, the meaning of the flag, which was it was a flag of slavocracy, and then we were able to talk to them about their racist views, for instance, and why are they racist, and what does this flag mean? The flag doesn't really, the flag is used as a racist symbol. Why do you want to, why do you want that? Why do you want a racist symbol? So we'd get into those conversations, but we'd also get into conversations about the differences between people. One being, as an example, we could find people who weren't very racist. We could find people who were very racist, and then we would talk to them, and then we would be able to try to get them to come to the clinic or some of the other programs, or, and that. And then one of the examples that I use, and which was very effective, was there was an individual who was very racist, very well-known racist. And I asked him, I said, you have children, right? Yeah. I said, well, what if your child needed some kind of an organ transplant and needed it right away, or this child is going to die, and it only came from a Black person? What would you do? And he said, well, of course I would. And I said, well, okay, so you're separating the differences in people. I said, can't you see that the only difference is the color of the skin, and your beliefs about the color of the skin? And so that made a lot of difference in this man's demeanor. He understood it. He understood what I was talking about. And so he became, one of our supporters and started changing. But the fact of the matter is that we were all racist, but we were anti-racist. And we wanted to make that point. And it's pretty hard for any white person to grow up in this society and not have some form of racism. But to be anti-racist, it's something that you have to question yourself on every day, every single day, and so that was the reason behind it. We quit using it, after a while. It served its purpose. I mean, we were protecting, doing security for the Black Panthers with that flag. I mean, they accepted it. They said, well, okay, if that's what it takes,
You use the Confederate flag basically to organize more hand sanitizer and to help the people that, because some of the people that did embrace the Confederate flag and were racist, you saw that they needed help. So you wanted to help them, and then in order to start the conversation with them, it was easier to start it with them if you had the Confederate flag as part of the logo.
No, absolutely. Yeah, it was easier to start that. It would have been much more difficult to go into, say, a bar or into a group and say, start talking about racism. But that flag brought out a lot of conversation that we normally wouldn't have had. And it did work, but it was a racist symbol to try to organize racist symbol to be anti-racist.
Please describe the Young Patriots 11-point program, how it addressed self-determination and controlling wealth from what a person produces, and addressing how schools are like a prison. Has there been any progress to this kind of in this kind of self-determination, and are schools still like prisons?
Well, there's been some changes. We've there's the school to prison, basically, that's happening in this country. Whereas, kids go directly from school to prisons. There's a lot of things going on in this prisons, in the schools these days, and it still exists. There's prisons for little children. They exist, although they're not really advertised very well.
So how so are they prisons for the kids?
Well, they're locked up, and they're locked up in confinement. They're there. I mean, in my opinion, a lot of the social service or the places where they take kids and confine them. You have what they used to call Audi home and all that, where they would take people and lock them up, kids, and lock them up. If it was in my hometown, for instance, you didn't have to do very much for the judge to send you off, to some type of confinement.
Mm.
And it's still that way. And the schools have a lot to do with it, because the schools a lot of times will evaluate, kids. So it's just called schools to prison because of, I think, the age group. And there are more kids going to prison now than there ever were before, for charges that, that could or could not be a criminal offense. They're finding it easier to lock people up because the prisons, most of them are profit making, and they don't care what your age is. They don't care at all. In this country, if you're from the Black community, 1 in 10 goes to jail. Why is that? It doesn't matter which age group you're in. As long as you go into those profit-making prisons, they're going to make money off of you regardless of who you are. And so, yeah, that is a big problem. It's still a problem. I was almost sent to, confinement several times, but my brother spent a year on a false charge. So it happens. It's still happening. And the part about the program, when it talks about addressing self-determination and controlling wealth from what a person produces, this is what we believed in terms of socialism. Believe that if a person produced a product, they should reap the benefits from that product. And that wealth is something that needs to be dispersed between the people.
So has there been any progress in this then?
No, this is a socialist program that our country, the capitalist system, would never allow, because they own the companies. You work for them. You don't work for yourself. You don't control any of it. This is where unions come in and try to help. But the belief is that if we produce something, we should be able to, reap the benefits from that. And that is that is a socialist belief, a Marxist belief that we believed in.
Do you know what percentage of the Young Patriots and the Rainbow Coalition are LGBTQ?
What they are now, I don't know, but I will say that that back in the day, we were one of the first organizations that fought for the rights of the gay community. And there were very few organizations, you know, fighting for that. But now there is what's called the second Rainbow Coalition formed, that we've just formed. And that includes the New African Black Panthers, New Era Young Lords, White Panthers, American Indian Movement, Brown Berets, Green Party, and many of these organizations have people that belong to LGBTQ. You know, we welcome them into this organization. So I would say at that point, percentage-wise, don't know, but there are a few of them, and that, you know, they are always welcome into this coalition, and we hope to get more into this coalition.
Is your goal now more to help, still to help the poor? What is your main focus now in your outreach?
It's still to help the poor. I run a school called North Alabama School for Organizers, and we train organizers. We train community people to organize. We also have survival programs. One of which we've just started was a free automotive clinic. We have mechanics, and we go out into the poor communities, into the poor, you know, poor homeless sites, and we fix their cars. A lot of people can't get to work. You know, they can't get to the hospital. They can't get their kids to school. Of course, some of them live in their car.
Right.
And so they have no way of getting them running or keeping them running or keeping them serviced.
And
So
and this organization is in Alabama. You don't have anything like this in Chicago.
not yet, but there are some people that are interested. We just started the program. It's very successful. We intend on expanding it. I know there's several in Alabama, one starting in Chattanooga, Tennessee. We hope to start, you know, others. And so that's one program. The other one is called
Before you move on, what are your hours of operation in such a program?
Well, it doesn't. We go out on certain days and just like we might go out. We're probably going to go out on, you know, we go out on a Saturday, and we have people. This will be in a location where there's people that have cars, but they're not running very well. Like we were at one location 2 weeks ago. There's 13 families in this facility, and over half the cars didn't run. So we fixed 16 cars in about 4 hours.
What kind of facilities are these that house these people that just kind of are living out of their cars?
These people that we were at a facility where they were living inside, but we also have people that were living in their cars. And we've been able to find some of these people permanent housing too. I know there were 13 families living in this one facility, and we were able to service all their cars. We're going over to it's a low income housing project, which there's about 45 families there that we will go over. We have volunteer mechanics that come out, they donate their time. We do fundraisers to buy the parts and to buy the oil and all that. So when we generally try to cook for them and give them a lunch or a dinner, and that's one of the programs. The other one is called the Homeless Construction Coalition. We go out and build structures and platforms for the homeless. They to put their tents on, for instance, because when it floods or rains, they can lose a lot of their supplies, a lot of their stuff. So we build platforms so they don't have to put their tents on the ground. We build wheelchair ramps for those that need it, and we even build platforms for dog houses, and also for their supplies. And we do that by going out to business and getting these shipping pallets. And then we put plywood on that, and we put their facilities, their property on it.
How do you find these people? Do you, by word of mouth, that they're living in certain locations, or do these people come to you?
Oh, no, we all know where they are. We've been working with the homeless for a long time, so we know where they all are, so we know where to go, and we know people, in them, because we've been getting them services and food and even jobs for a while, and apartments. So we know who they are. We also have another organization called Blues to Bluegrass, and that is made up of local musicians. We have about 30 musicians that work with this program, and we go out and we put on a concert, and it generally lasts. We generally have about 9 or 10 different groups performing, and it lasts almost all day. And they donate their time, and we do benefits for. The last one was for a mental health organization. We've done them for for the free clinic here. We've done one for the Etowah Visitation Project, in which we're involved in, and we go visit the ICE detainees, that have been arrested. And so there's a number of different organizations, but we raise money that way too. And then we do other things. But we do try to carry on the legacy of the Rainbow Coalition and survival programs and helping people.
Well, when you are there any organizations like that, like these auto clinics in Chicago? Do you know?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of, but that's something that we can certainly organize. I think that's something that I'm sure mechanics, people that like working on cars, would donate their time.
And I think earlier we were discussing Fred Hampton. Is there anybody of Fred Hampton's stature now that is leading this advocacy that let's say that the government would be worried about?
Well, there's several that the government's worried about, but I don't know of anyone that, to that caliber, than Fred Hampton. I think someone that is being very well recognized in this country now, but it's a little different politics, is Reverend Barber of the Poor People's Campaign. And I think there will be people coming out of this second Rainbow Coalition that will be recognized like that, but it's no one like, like his caliber, like the type of person that Fred Hampton was. His legacy just lives on, and that's what we have to kind of organize around is his legacy.
After he was, yeah, go ahead.
No, and that's what we try to do. We try to carry on the legacy of the original Rainbow Coalition.
After he was killed, did that affect the Young Patriots relationship with the Black Panthers?
Well, it did in a sense that it was much more difficult to work together in terms of people being dispersed. As far as, the camaraderie, no, it didn't. We all still had the same respect for each other. But that's when we stopped working together to a large degree, but also we did continue, we did continue with some of our programs for a little while, but then that became much more difficult. And there's just, the whole thing affected everybody. His death affected everybody, everyone in our organization. And we didn't have the same type of communication that we had before. People were, of course, dispersed and going underground, so that was a problem. And that was, that's a tragedy, because I think the Rainbow Coalition could have been the third political party in this country. And I think that's what they were afraid of.
In addition to Fred Hampton being killed, there were others that were killed afterwards too, right? At that time.
Yes.
And that's what drove you underground. And that was most of the work from COINTELPRO.
Yes. Yeah, it was COINTELPRO. It was the state police. It was the local police. It was a number of different agencies.
And who was in charge of Chicago at that time? It was Mayor Daley.
Mayor Daley, yes. Mm-hmm.
And COINTELPRO, for our listeners, mean Counterintelligence Program. And they're part of the FBI. Yeah,
they came about in, I think, in the 50s during the McCarthy era, when Senator McCarthy was trying to call everybody a communist, and they resurrected it back when the FBI started, investigating the Black Panthers. And so the COINTELPRO, counterintelligence, they did a lot of they had false newspapers, articles that went out. They had a lot of, and locked up a lot of people, which, falsely. It's just counterintelligence, that you would use, on some foreign country. But, this is where the state had turned against its own people, just turned against its own people. And so they weren't about to let us gain any type of power that they could keep from us doing it.
Let's do a little WZRD community assessment with you. WZRD Chicago, being a nonprofit radio station, must be responsible to the community we serve. WZRD is mandated to file quarterly issues with the FCC, on non-entertainment community-focused programming. We like to assess the community for these quarterly issue topics with 3 questions. First, what is most important to you?
Well, what's most important to me right now is for us to get a real grasp on what's going on in this country in terms of, what's going on with the right-wing movement in this country, the white supremacists, the militias, they're extreme danger to us in this country. The Trumpism, has they have a way of destroying not only democracy, you know, and for people that believe in that, they need to really do something about that, because that is nothing more than fascism. And you're seeing what's going on in this country now. They're trying to make it illegal, you know, for people to be an LGBTQ. They're trying to make it illegal to feed the poor, illegal to even protest, you know. So people need to get together and they need to start fighting this, because if they don't, you know, we're going to be in real trouble. We're going to be in a lot of trouble in this country as far as being controlled, you know, and fascism.
What long-term problem must we address?
Well, that hopefully it won't be a long term, but the other one is poverty. I mean, you got to address poverty in this country. You know, more and more people are becoming homeless, jobless. You know, you got robotics taking over jobs, you know, that people need. It's just the biggest problem right now is poverty, I see, that people need to address and they need to get involved in, because poverty, that, you know, homelessness, you know, and a lot of people are being evicted from their apartments now, their houses. That's putting more people out on the streets. You know, so these are real issues that people need to get involved in. I think that's a very big one, is to deal with poverty and homelessness.
And I think what you were saying, what the point is for your book and all your work, is that if people don't take matters into their own hand and address it with advocacy, nobody is going to do it for them. The government definitely won't help.
That's right, because, you know, a lot of people elect a politician and say, I don't have to deal with it. I elected a politician here who's going to take care of these problems. Well, they don't. They create more problems and become more wealthy and create more problems. So you got to take it into your own hands. You have to do something, you know. And a lot of times when you want to change something, you got to take the fight to them. You know, you got to go to those politicians that are causing these problems and confront them, you know. But a lot of people just won't do that. You know, they can stay docile, but that's not going to help anyone.
What problem must be addressed now?
Well, the same, everything that I would just talked about,
Mhm.
all of that has to be confronted. Because if we don't, we're going to end up in a lot of trouble. We're going to end up with a government that, you know, that doesn't represent us now, but it's going to be even worse. They're just going to make things worse. And a lot of the old white politicians don't want to lose control of this country. And this country is, you know, it's people of color now. And they're not, and that's what they're fighting. And they don't want that to have control. So I think we need to just, all of those areas that we just talked about, those are extremely important for us to start dealing with.
You describe your regret about how the Young Patriots broke with the Students for Democratic Society, SDS. Is this part of why you are now reaching out to NEIU? Hy Thurman.
Yeah, no, it's not why I'm reaching out to NEIU. You see, I want to pay back a little bit, because NEIU, I owe Northeastern. You know, I owe them a lot because they helped me, you know, get an education. They helped me to organize. It helped me to organize and put me on a whole different road in my life. You know, I probably couldn't have written a book if I hadn't gone to college. And so I owe, you know, Northeastern, and I'd like to be able to pay it back somehow. SDS, I feel really bad about breaking with them. I actually wasn't really a part of that decision, but if it had been, I would have said, no, let's not do it, because um, these people put a lot into our community, although a lot of them didn't understand and they didn't really represent us. But a lot of them did. And I think they brought a lot to our community. They taught us a lot.
You mean they did a lot of the footwork that
Yes,
mhm.
they did a lot of footwork. They did a lot of organizing. And I think there were numbers too. I mean, there were a large number of them. When we got together, we were a larger number. And I think that they were misunderstood, a lot by the community. And I think there should have been more dialogue before this happened. And I just think that they deserve more credit than what they got. And they were responsible for a lot, as we had said before. I mean, they did food co-ops, rent controlled buildings. They even had a theater, got people involved. All these rent strikes, march on the police station, they were involved in that.
So who initiated a lot of these projects? Was it even the students that initiated some of these projects and then they implemented?
Both. It was both the community and them and
Mhm.
SDS.
Mhm.
But SDS gave us a somewhat of an outline of how to start organizing a little better, especially as young folks. And they taught us a lot. They taught us a lot about, the ideology, political ideology, a lot about third world countries. A lot of us had to learn by word of mouth because a lot of us couldn't read.
Mhm. And you mentioned too that uh, you learn about the international scene and the national scene, but you still wanted to keep it local because if you couldn't fix your own backyard, then there was no point in extending further.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, we wanted our community to be self-determined, to make our own decision. We had a chance to go national, and there was a split within our organization
With the
because
Patriot Party.
not.
Mhm.
We
Mhm.
did not go national,
Mhm.
and that's where the Patriot Party came in, and they split and went national. And so we
But
thought that
it didn't last though.
no,
It
it didn't
didn't.
last because they couldn't get the community base that they needed.
Mhm.
They were too new. They were outsiders, and so it just didn't work out very well. And but we had our base, and we wanted to stay there to try to fight over renewal and to try to fight this college coming in, and a lot of other issues that we felt we needed to do on a local level, because we believed in revolution, and revolution has to start in your
And,
community.
and you were organizing before you got involved with the Northeastern. However, once you started working with Northeastern, the NEIU brought in resources and to spread the word, to increase your reach, your organizing, and you learned from them, and then also NEIU and you helped each other.
Oh yes, and the classes that I took were
Mhm.
tremendously helpful. At Northeastern. Obviously, I still use my anthropology training, and I still use my political science training and all the other classes that help me to understand people, and that's what kept me going. Well, I've been going for over 50 years, and I'll hang it up one of these days, but not today. And I'll just keep going, but I'd really love to be able to come to Northeastern sometime.
Well, we'd love to have you, and hopefully it'll be very soon. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Hy Thurman. author of Revolutionary Hillbilly and also co-founder of the Young Patriots organization and the Rainbow Coalition. Thank you so much for joining us today on WZRD. Hy Thurman.
Thank you.